Thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Karen Butter, and I'm president of the Friends of the Alameda Free Library. We're going to start in just a minute, but we want to give everyone a chance to log on to the webinar. In the meantime, welcome, and we're so glad you are joining us this evening for a conversation with George Takei, social justice activist, social media superstar, Grammy-nominated recording artist, New York Times bestselling author, and pioneering actor. Tonight, we will be talking about his book, They Called Us Enemy. We're delighted he is joining us at this Friends at Home event, and we'll get going in just a minute. Before we get started, I want to review a few technical details. This is a live webinar. The audio for the audience is muted and the video is turned off, so you will only see the speaker and the moderator. Please use chat to introduce yourselves and ask questions. And please be respectful in your comments. Before I turn it over to our moderator, I want to talk briefly about the Friends of the Alameda Free Library. We are a nonprofit organization and raise funds and advocate for an outstanding public library in Alameda, California. This Friends at Home event provides an opportunity to connect with you and to share common experiences. A special thanks to our supporters for their ongoing donations so that we can continue to honor our commitments to the library and to support future Friends at Home events. We ask that you consider a donation to the Friends in any amount that is comfortable for you via our website at alamedafriends.com or use the direct link listed on the chat. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce Mary Ellen Hunt, who will serve as moderator. She's a former dancer, now educator and administrator, who has written about dance, the arts, and the cultural scene of the Bay Area for a number of organizations, including the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Jose Mercury News, and the Diablo magazine. Welcome, Mary Ellen. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you for being here, everyone. I'm seeing people introduce themselves already in the chat, and I'm excited that we have folks from all over. We want to thank you for being here for the Friends at Home author webinar with George Takei. As Karen mentioned, he is the author of a graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy. I also want to take a moment to thank the Friends of the Alameda Free Library, especially Kelly Ground, David Briel, Karen Romer, Karen Manuel, and of course, Karen Butter for organizing this event. So this evening, it's my privilege to introduce George Takei, social justice activist, social media superstar, Grammy-nominated recording artist. Is there anything you can't do? He's also a New York Times bestselling author and a pioneering actor whose career has spanned 6 decades. Mr. Takei has appeared in more than 40 feature films and hundreds of television roles, most famously as Hikaru Sulu in Star Trek. And he uses his success as a platform to fight for social justice, LGBTQ+ rights, and marriage equality. His advocacy is personal. During World War II, Mr. Takei spent his childhood unjustly imprisoned in United States internment camps, along with 120,000 other Japanese Americans. And it's this story that he recounts in his 2019 graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy, which shot to #2 on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list in just 1 week after it was released. So I'm a huge fan of your wit and wisdom. So I'm very, very thrilled to be able to say welcome, George Takei. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. And it's my pleasure to join your group of book lovers to discuss my book.
Excellent. So the first question that I'd like to kind of start with actually is maybe in the middle of your book. One of the episodes that really stays with me, and They Called Us Enemy, you recount waking up in the middle of the night, your family is in an internment camp, and you hear your parents talking overnight about loyalty questionnaires, these infamous questionnaires that were designed to test loyalty to the United States. You must have been about 5 or 6 at the time. I have a daughter about the same age. Kids that age are pretty sharp. But I'm wondering, can you talk about how much you really understood about what was going on around you and what was happening?
Yes, I understood what was happening to the extent that I could understand. Remember, we were in a prison camp, and all of the there were 10 internment camps altogether. And the two internment camps that we were incarcerated in, the first was in the swamps of Arkansas, the second in Northern California, Tule Lake. Uh, they were camps where each family had a partitioned unit in the barrack. But there were other camps where 5 or 6 families were put into an open barrack. There was no privacy. Even those that had partitions was paper thin, and they could hear us, and we could hear them. And when my parents were discussing something as personal and as dangerous as responding to the loyalty questionnaire, they wanted to keep it to themselves. And when I woke up, they reassured me everything is fine. They're just talking about adult things. Go back to sleep. And I understood that they were talking about something very important. But my parents never talked about, and in fact, most parents who had personal conversations between the couples, they didn't talk in their barracks because of the lack of privacy. I
Mm.
remember my parents asked a neighbor lady to keep an eye on us, and they went for walks, long walks. They were gone for a long time. They went far away from our barrack, our block, to another block where they would not be known. And they had their conversations. And what I noticed when they came back from these walks, more often than not, my mother's eyes were bloodshot. It looked like she had been crying and had prepared herself to come back into our block. Uh, and so I understood that it was something that I should not know about, and that they wanted to keep it personal. And so I respected that. We were in a prison camp, and there were people that were referred to by the Japanese word inu, dog,
Mm.
people who were considered snitches to curry favor with the administration. And so it was very dangerous to be talking about something like the loyalty questionnaire and to be overheard by a snitch, a inu, a dog. So we, even as a 5 or 6 year old child, we had an understanding that we were in a prison camp and we had to respect the need for privacy on the part of our parents.
That sense that there was some danger around you, around these
Absolutely.
conversations.
I mean,
Yeah.
those soldiers were carrying rifles, and uh, camp life could be turbulent. Not so much at the Ark. We were first, first of all, we were sent to Santa Anita Racetrack, a horse racing track, because the camps were being built immediately after we were forced out of our homes. And we had to stay in horse stalls, smelly, pungent with the stink of raw horse manure. And then when the construction was finished, we were sent out to the swamps of Arkansas, where we were there. And that was the place where the loyalty questionnaire came down. Uh, the whole idea was so completely irrational and cruel. We were Americans of Japanese ancestry. We had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor. But after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the country was swept up in mass hysteria mixed with naked racism. And what we've experienced the last few years in the United States, Asian Americans being elderly, fragile Asian Americans being attacked and smacked down, and a few were killed. In San Francisco area, there was an elderly Asian man who was walking down the sidewalk, and this young man came running down the sidewalk with all that momentum and smacked him down on the sidewalk so powerfully, and his head hit the concrete, and he died.
Yeah.
Something like that was happening immediately after Pearl Harbor. Because of this face, we were looked at with suspicion and fear and outright hatred because we looked like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. And the government reacted. The leaders of our country were being led by the mass hysteria. And certainly President Roosevelt felt very insecure. The bombing of Pearl Harbor was a sneak attack. We were not prepared for it. And here he realized we had the whole West Coast vulnerable and exposed. And in our own country, we had people that looked just like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor, and they needed a scapegoat. And so they came down with a curfew. I mean, they were stampeded by the masses. And so when they had all that violence happening, they came down with a curfew, in part for our protection, I think. We had to be home by 8 p.m. at night and stay home until 6 a.m. in the morning. We were imprisoned in our home at night. The next morning, if you went to the bank to make a deposit or a withdrawal, we discovered that our bank accounts were frozen. Some people had their life savings in the bank. That was taken away by the government. My father couldn't do business. He couldn't pay the mortgage. We lost his business and we lost the home. And we stayed in our home, a 2-bedroom home on Garnet Street in Los Angeles, for a funny way to put it, but for free. We didn't pay the mortgage because we couldn't.
Right, right.
The
And
soldiers came.
well, one of the things that strikes me about They Called Us Enemy is that you include so much historical context, these things that are going on around the individual story, your experience of what was going on. And also, I think about, there are these big battles that are happening on the political level, but then there's ways that the individuals have to confront the fallout from that. And I'm wondering how you were impacted by the way that your family, your mother and your father, were confronting those choices. You talked a little bit about how your father, in the book, you talked about your father would talk with you as a teenager later on, very openly about the things that had happened. So what effect did that have on you? Having seen this as a young person, having heard these stories later on as a teenager, you're so active. Is that where that comes from?
Indeed, it does. I was shaped by the internment. I do have my childhood memories, but I was formed by my father and the discussions we had when I was a teenager after dinner. I realize now, in retrospect, that my father was an extraordinary man because he paid the highest price in anguish and in loss and the rage and the whole horrific experience. And yet he was able to tell me when I became curious and inquisitive and sometimes challenging in our after dinner conversation, he told me that you have to look at the big picture. President Roosevelt was a great president in the 30s when this nation was being crushed by the economic depression and the people were depressed. People were unemployed. They lost their homes. They were hungry. They were lining up in long lines for a bowl of soup, not unlike what we just recently experienced, except it wasn't for a bowl of soup. They were getting cardboard boxes of food that they put into their cars. Big difference there. But it was a horrific time. But President Roosevelt said, just to galvanize them, to bring the spirit of the people up so that we can fight this depression. He said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. But our democracy is a people's democracy. And the people are fallible human beings. Even a president is a person with all the human fallibilities. And when he felt very insecure because of the exposed nature of our West Coast, he was stampeded by the mass hysteria, and he acted with fear. What he said in the Depression, there is nothing to fear but fear itself. That same man became fearful, and with no charges, with no due process. You know, in our system, a justice system, due process is a central pillar. And when you're arrested, you have the right to know why you're arrested. And then you have the right to challenge those charges in a court of law. And they have to provide evidence that those challenges are indeed valid, true. And then you're punished. In our case, none of that. No charges, no trial, just punishment. And so, it was a racist fear that the president had, and the people were swept up by that same fear. And so my father said, the importance of a people's democracy is that it's a participatory democracy, and the people have to engage in the process. And from a very early age, my father encouraged both my brother and me to be active in student government. And in junior high school, I became student body president. And in high school, I was senior board president. So I was an activist from my teenage days. And, and we continued to have these after dinner conversations. And I kept challenging my father, you know, but we were imprisoned. We were innocent people with no charges and no trial, imprisoned. It was against our democracy. And my father said, yes, democracy is a human process. And it suffers from human fallibility. But we who believe in that form of government have to actively participate. We have responsibilities as citizens, and we have to engage in a participatory democracy. And it's because people were, you know, even the president can make a mistake, a human mistake. But if the majority of the people who really care about those ideals are actively engaged, there's that balance there. And so he said, the hardest form of government is a democracy, because we have to take on the responsibility of making our government be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. But the easiest form of government is a dictatorship. You give it over to the man, and he does it for you as well as to you. And so he urged, my father was something of a sexist, I think, because he urged me and my brother Henry to be active in student government. But he didn't urge my sister to do that.
Well, I actually have a question. I mean, your father sounds incredibly wise and extraordinary, and what a gift to be able to give you that ability to see past what had happened to him individually. Your mother comes across in this story, though, as a very strong personality, as somebody who really, you know, like worked hard to keep the family going and did whatever she could to make life normal for you. Did you ever talk with her about her experience?
Well, my mother was a realist. And so, as I described in the book, she dealt with the immediate reality, whereas my father was something of a politician. He didn't see himself as a politician, but under those circumstances of being imprisoned, and you know, the people were all either embittered or depressed. Marriages were stressed, and my father too. On the train ride, he was unusually melancholy. But once we got to the swamps of Arkansas, he realized that in order for us to survive this, we've got to work together as a community. And so he was volunteering for all the community needs, if you can call being in a prison camp a community.
Yeah.
When newcomers, I mean, the latecomers were being unloaded from the train, he helped carry their luggages to their units. He helped them with the cots that they had to get from that pile back into their units. And when, the Arkansas camp was a reclaimed swampland. And when it rained, it turned right back into a swamp. And elderly people and mothers with young children could not make that 3 times a day trek to the mess hall or to the latrine because their feet would sink into the muck, and senior citizens couldn't pull their feet up from the muck. And young men had to carry the elderly people on their backs to the mess hall. And uh, um, the seniors got coffee cans, and they took care of the elimination business back in their units. But he was there actively participating as a volunteer. And so the people of the block elected him block manager, and he played that role of city councilman or a congressional representative of that block that we lived in.
A remarkable kind of leadership that he discovered there. I'm especially struck with how compelling the visuals are in, they call Enemy. Harmony Becker's illustrations are amazing. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided on a graphic novel format as opposed to a traditional words only style memoir?
Well, actually, I had written a words only autobiography, which was published in 1994. That was when Star Trek was at its height of popularity. And every Star Trek actor was writing their autobiography, I say with air quotes. Mine is a genuine, true autobiography. I wrote mine. And I published published it in 1994. And so it covers my life from my childhood in American prison camps to that point in the early 90s. And it sold very well. The first third is on my childhood imprisonment, because most people, most of my colleagues from Star Trek wrote it to keep their Star Trek relationship up. But I seized it as an opportunity to tell the story of this chapter of American history. It happened to Japanese Americans, but it is really an American story. And too few people back then, people that I considered well-informed, educated people, when I shared my childhood with them, they were aghast that something like that happened. And so I was compelled to do a great deal of research, not just my memories, personal memories, but the, the story of governmental bills and the reaction that that had. And I wrote it as a biography, autobiography. But I, when I was a teenager, I loved comic books, preteen and teens. And it's that age when every pore is opened and young people are absorbing in information that stays with you. And I thought, if I have people, adults that of my generation, that don't know about that chapter of American history, which has important lessons to teach, I need to tell that story to more people and to young people. I targeted the young people because they're going to be the voters of tomorrow. And
Mhm.
hopefully, beyond that, they're going to become the movers and shakers. And I wanted that generation at that point when they're absorbing in information so that they won't be shocked when they hear about the imprisonment of innocent people on the basis of race. And so that's why I decided to do it as a graphic memoir. And you asked about Harmony Becker. She was a real find. She was presented by the publishers. And with a name like Harmony Becker, I had a lot of other names, but I never would have chosen Harmony Becker. I wanted someone who had some kind of sensitivity, if not actual physical experience of the internment experience. And Harmony did not have that experience. She's much too young, but she's Japanese despite her name.
Mhm.
She was born in Japan, raised in Japan, speaks Japanese, writes Japanese. Her father was a Caucasian American, and her mother was Japanese. And she helped a lot with these little nuances. For
Mhm.
example, when you walk into a room with mostly French people, say it's a cocktail party, and you walk in and most people are speaking French. I don't speak French, and so you feel kind of out of it. And I wanted to have that sense in some of the scenes where they're surrounded by Japanese speaking people. And Harmony, without my asking, she was able to write the Japanese uh, dialogue in the balloon when the
Mhm.
people are speaking Japanese in the colloquial language. So she's a wonderful artist. She's great at capturing emotions in the eyes. And what really sold me on her was she made 5-year-old me irresistibly adorable.
I'm sure you were and you are irresistibly adorable. So I have no doubt that she was able to capture
Well,
that.
I'm the grandpa age now.
Well, it is interesting. It's very striking. And I think you really have hit that target of being able to speak to young people. The tone often is very kind of avuncular, like you're just telling a story to younger people. I'm wondering, is it received differently, between young people or older people? Do the young people see this story differently when you talk to them about it?
I don't think so. The teenagers, they get it. And uh, the ones that buy They Called Us Enemy are the children of parents that either know about it or may have shared that knowledge with them. So, no, it's not that alien a story. And particularly, now when we have the Asian hate happening right in our times today, uh, there are people that think that what's happening to Asians, Asian Americans, is a unique phenomenon. No, that is not. That attitude and view of Asian Americans is as old as American history. We're in parallel with Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter has a longer history. They have 4 centuries of their history of this systemic racism, and we just had 4 years. But
Mhm.
uh, this kind of violence is at a peak right now, but it has always been there. Sometimes in a rather dormant situation, rather extraordinary incidents of violence, but it's there in American society. And all it takes is a major event like Pearl Harbor or 9/11 to stimulate that kind of overt racism.
Mhm.
Muslim Americans, we had a president who first action, the executive order he signed was the Muslim travel ban.
Mhm. Yeah.
The same mentality that put us innocent people in prison camps
Yeah.
based on racism. That was our only crime.
So I want you to hold on to that because this is an interesting piece of the discussion. I see some folks are putting questions into the chat. So I do want to say in a moment, we're going to open it up to questions from our audience. So please do put any questions that you have for Mr. Takei into the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. While the audience is thinking about that, though, I want to come back to this issue that you raised. I mean, in the last year or so, we have seen such a rise in violence against the AAPI community. But as you mentioned, there have been these things that make you think mass hysteria is not so very far away, very easy to trigger. Are there things that you believe that we could be doing to combat these misperceptions, to stem that tide, to turn things around? What might your father have said about what we should be doing to turn the corner on this after all these centuries?
Well, what we are doing now, discussing it, getting it in the air, and the media plays an important part. I hate the term Japanese internment camp, and we still see it in the press because, I mean, anyone who knows English grammar, Japanese internment camps would be run by the government of Japan. We are Americans of Japanese ancestry, imprisoned in our own country, the United States of America, guarded over by the US military, and in camps in the United States. In our case, it was the swamps of Arkansas and the border area of Northern California, and ordered into those prison camps by the President of the United States. It was a prison camp, and hysteria is easy to foment against people of color.
Mhm.
We are identifiable just by visually seeing us.
And one of the questions in the chat kind of touches on this. When you see these videos of kids being held, at the border, all of these things going on, what's the feeling that comes to you having experienced this yourself?
Oh, that's why I'm actively involved. From the time I was a teenager, I was involved in the civil rights movement. I was during the Vietnam War, which was a war being fought in Southeast Asia, but it was dividing the United States. People that supported the war and those who were passionately against it and were for peace. And I was, by that time, I was pursuing an acting career in Hollywood. So I was a member of the Entertainment Industry for Peace and Justice and worked alongside people like Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland. In fact, Jane funded one of my rallies that I organized in the Asian American community. She said, why are Asian Americans not involved in the peace movement? And I said, well, because we look like this and we get punished. I have been punished as a child for looking like this and put in a prison camp. And there's that saying, the nail that sticks up gets pounded down. Asian Americans have been pounded down for being visible, being noticeable. And so they're reluctant to themselves put them up for visibility. And so I said, it's got to, we can't have an Asian American rally in a public park or in the desert of Palm Springs area. We need to have it in a area that's comfortable for Asian Americans to be seen together, supporting a political cause. And I said to her, at downtown, we have a very fine hotel called the Biltmore Hotel with a huge ballroom, the Biltmore Bowl. If we hold a rally there and call it Peace Sunday, a very Pacific sounding, rather than a rah-rah anti-war, rally, the Asians will come out And sure enough, it did. And it was made possible because Jane gave us the initial payment to the Biltmore Hotel for the venue.
One of the questions that's in the chat, and I think you're kind of getting at it a little bit too, what can we do to inspire more people to engage in this fight, to feel empowered to stand up? Do you have any advice for?
Well, people are doing that. We are organizing, but at the same time, the complaint is, how do you get allies? Well, you get allies by being an ally. I was involved in the civil rights movement,
Mm.
An Asian American. I did a civil rights musical called Fly Blackbird. I was a lone Asian amongst a college crowd of primarily Black people, as well as a lot of liberal white people. But I stood out. I was willing to stand out. And so we have to be allies in order to have allies. I was a part of the civil rights movement or the peace movement during the Vietnam War. And when we started a movement to get an apology and redress from the United States government for that unjust imprisonment, uh, I was able to call on my friends who happened to be non-Japanese American, but because of the uh, allies that I had made by being an ally to them, we had allies. We have to be allies on every other issue that is against the noble ideals of our democracy: equal justice under the law, equal protection under the law, due process. These are just words. I'm quoting my father. They're just words on parchment or on a piece of paper. We, the people, have to give it meaning. What does it mean to have something called, a phrase called equal justice or due process? We are the ones who have to infuse the meaning, the truth in those words.
Absolutely. It's so important to stand up for others as well as for the causes that you believe in really strongly. Somebody in the chat has asked if you would talk a little bit about your involvement with Allegiance, with the musical. A fantastic show, was on Broadway and has been seen by audiences all over. Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved with that project and why it was so important to you to really push that project forward?
Well, I'm an actor and a writer, and my mission is to raise the awareness of that chapter of American history. And the best way to do it for an actor and a writer is to use who I am and what I do. And I've always thought that our story of the internment, it makes for a powerful theater piece. But maybe it was fortuitous. We're theater people, and my husband and I, when we're in New York, we go to the theater every night. One night we went to the theater, and we got there nice and early, and there were two seats in front of us that were vacant. And two guys came in, an Asian guy and a long, tall Italian American guy. And my husband and I were chatting. The Asian guy recognized my voice, and he turned around and said, "You're George Takei, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And we started chatting, and we had an abbreviated, nice chat. And during the intermission, we chatted some more. And we went back to our hotel that night saying, "Those were really passionate theater people." The next night, we went to see In the Heights, Lin-Manuel Miranda's a musical. He's the author and star of Hamilton. We went to see In the Heights, a Puerto Rican story. And we walked into the theater, And this time, not in front of us, but the same two people were in the same row where we had aisle seats, and they recognized us walking down the aisle, and they raised their hand and waved at us. So we waved back at them, but they were about in the center of that aisle. And so that's all we did. We waved at each other, and the musical began. It's the story of this Puerto Rican community, and there's a very bright young girl, a young lady who wants to go to college, but her father has a financial straitened financial circumstances, and he can't afford to send her to college, and he's heartbroken and feels useless. And near the end of the first act, he has a song number titled "Inútil," useless. He sings it in Spanish, but and I understand Spanish. I grew up part of my childhood at post internment in East LA, Mexican American barrio, and I fell in love with the Mexican American culture and the food. My mother learned how to cook Mexican, and she made the best enchiladas and tacos, and so I understood the dialogue of the father feeling useless to his bright young daughter. And that reminded me of my after dinner conversations with my father when we were talking about how he felt in camp. And he said the worst part for him was to look at the three of us, my brother and my baby sister, and see them behind or see the barbed wire fence. He had so much hope for us and this unknown future for them, and the kind of launching pad in life behind barbed wires. He felt anguished, so helpless. And he said that was the worst part of it for him, to see his three children. And that song, "Inútil," useless, reminded me of that conversation with my father. And I'm what's known as a crier. I'm a weeper in the theater. And it was such a moving song that I was literally bawling. And Brad, my husband, knows me. And initially he's trying to elbow me and sense that I'm getting choked up, and he'll be going like this. But then when I start making sounds, then I feel him going away from me like this. And sure enough, I broke down and I was crying, and the intermission comes and the lights go blazing on, and I'm quickly trying to dry my face, and the two guys come clambering over the knees to chat with us again, and they see me wiping my face. The Asian guy was Jay Kuo, composer, lyricist.
Yeah.
And the tall, lean guy was a producer, Lorenzo Tione, who produced his productions in San Francisco. And they asked me, why did that song affect you so profoundly? And in that brief moment during the intermission, I shared the reason why. And so after the play, we talked a little bit more about that. And that was the genesis of Allegiance.
Wow.
I met the composer lyricist and a man who's a producer, and I had the story. And so we got together and we started developing that.
So it seems like a quirk of fate, maybe, but also I think, just wonderful that you were able to connect with them and that they understood your story and what you were talking about.
It was fated. Somebody was pulling those strings.
Definitely. And Jay is such a fabulously talented person.
You know Jay, do you?
I do. Yeah, I've met him once or twice. I don't know him as well as you do. So
how did you meet him?
I met him through a mutual friend, actually, Kelly Ground, who's on this call.
In the Bay Area?
In the Bay Area,
Yeah,
yeah.
because he and Lorenzo both lived in San Francisco. They live in New York now.
That's right. Yes, exactly. So one of the questions in the chat that I thought might be interesting is thinking again about what's going on today and what happened in your experience during World War II. Does that feel the same? Do you get an echo of the feelings that you had, as a kid growing up in World War II when you see what's going on during the pandemic? The way that, as I said, we're so close to that sort of mass hysteria.
It happens periodically. In the 1980s, Japanese automobiles started becoming successful in the United States. Toyota, Honda, Mazda, and there was a huge unemployment among auto workers in Detroit. There was great restlessness in Detroit on that. A young Chinese American man was going to get married, and his friends took him on a bachelor party to a bar in Detroit. Two unemployed auto workers confronted him, mistaking a Chinese American man for Japanese American. We look alike. And they confronted him, and there were words exchanged, and the Chinese American group decided to just leave. Those two guys followed them out. One picked up a baseball bat and came out with a baseball bat. A young man named Vincent Chin was focused on, and they beat him with a baseball bat to death. They beat him to death. Chinese American mistaken for a Japanese American. And that was outrageous enough. But the two murderers were dragged into court, and the judge made an astounding statement. He said he understands the anguish and pain of unemployed auto workers. And he gave them a $3,000 fine and a 3-year imprisonment, which was pardoned. They got away scot-free, and it was so outrageous. The judiciary was involved in this outrage as well. And the Asian American community from the West Coast to the East Coast were up in arms. I flew from Los Angeles to Detroit to participate in a rally there. That happened in the 1980s because of the advent of Japanese automobiles. But I know also from the history of my town, Los Angeles, back when it was called El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora, la Reina de Los Angeles. It was a Mexican pueblo. And Mexican pueblos have a central plaza. And the Chinatown in the 1880s was to the northeast of the Central Plaza. And a white woman claimed to have been harassed by a Chinese man. A vigilante formed. They poured into Chinatown, dragged out 17 Chinese men and young men, and they strung them up in the Central Plaza. 17 Chinese men lynched in the Central Plaza of Los Angeles at that time. What happened in the South also happened in 1800s California. My mother was born in, today we call it Sacramento, a suburb of Sacramento, but it was called Florin when my mother was born. It was an agricultural community. And when she was of school age, she would have had to go to a segregated school for Asian kids and Mexican kids. And the white kids went to a far superior school. my grandfather was a successful as a farmer, and he didn't want his children to get that inferior education. So he sent his children all in stages to Japan to be educated. And so my American-born mother was educated in Japan in a segregated school there too. She was sent to a girls' school, and there was a boys' school which taught serious academics, and a girls' school taught flower arrangement and kabuki and all the cultural things. But she had a Japanese education. And my father, who was born in Japan, but brought to San Francisco when he was a young boy and educated in San Francisco, was more Americanized than my American-born mother. So, California was not that different from the American South. We had lynchings in Los Angeles, and we had segregated education in rural Sacramento.
Yeah, it strikes me. We've been hearing so much about what happened in Tulsa, which so many people did not know about. And yet these are stories that occur anywhere, can happen any place. I'm curious, how has your novel, They Called Us Enemy, been received in Japan?
It's been translated into Japanese, and I haven't gotten reports on the Japanese sales, which to me indicates something. They're not too interested.
Okay.
But I get a lot of reports from the German sales. It is making a lot of waves in Germany. As I said, I had that Zoom conversation with Munich, but there were people from Frankfurt and Hamburg and all over Germany. And the English version is selling well. The translated version is selling well, but not as well as the English version. And I haven't gotten a report from Brazil on the Portuguese translation, but the Spanish translation is going well, both in the western part of the United States as well as Florida, where they have a huge Puerto Rican and Cuban population.
I think that as we're saying here, there's a lot of resonance with this story. People are very, very interested in your story, no matter what language it's in.
What's happening on the border right now, the horrific thing of children now being sent by their parents to find safety and a better life, more opportunities, and they're being refused. And there's a whole south of the border, a whole homeless community. So the kinds of tents that we see on our streets in Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco. The homeless issue is a horrible, horrible blight on America.
Yeah, it's so prevalent. So I'm interested, you are such a role model for Asian American actors in Hollywood at a time when there was a lot of unfavorable stereotypes going on. Looking at Hollywood today, do you see a change in the way that Asian Americans are depicted, the kinds of roles that they're playing, the kinds of stories that are being told?
I am 84 years old. I have seen the whole spectrum of how Hollywood has been. And compared with the time when I first started as an aspiring actor in Hollywood in the late 1950s, that was a misspeak. I am not that old, 1850s. 1950s when I first started acting. And I've been lucky because, well, I was a theater student and I was at UCLA. And this casting director from Warner Brothers who has the integrity of going to see college productions of plays in the local colleges, saw me in a play of Bertolt Brecht's Good Woman of Szechuan at
Oh, wow.
UCLA and
Yeah.
plucked me out of that and plunked me into my first feature film starring Richard Burton. And all my scenes were with this great Shakespearean actor from England who was a very down-to-earth guy. I was out with the production for uh, just about more than 2 months, a little bit more than 2 months, with 2 weeks a location in Alaska. And when you're on location in a small fishing village, you get to know each other very well. And he's my, other actor in the same scenes. I got to know him so well, and it was such an incredible experience. And I was full of questions, a young starstruck, movie struck young kid, and here's this legendary man, and working together with him, and I peppered him with questions, set side in between shots, and I found that Richard Burton loved talking about himself. So we were a perfect fit. And I learned a great deal. Did you know that English was not his first language when he
Oh,
was growing up? He was, and Richard Burton is not his real name. He's Welsh, and his father was a Welsh coal miner, poverty stricken, and they spoke Welsh at home.
oh, wow.
English is an acquired language. And when you hear him speaking Shakespeare, or he's very proud of his Welsh background too, sitting set side with them, he would suddenly break out in quoting, we're talking about poets, and he would start quoting from Dylan Thomas in Welsh, which I didn't understand at all, but his stentorian voice, speaking Welsh, speaking Dylan Thomas in Welsh, I was absolutely transported. And
Wow.
we fit each other like hand in glove. It was such a wonderful experience. And I might add, this was his pre-Elizabethan period. Taylor, that is.
What a gift to be able to have that time with him. Amazing, amazing actor. I have one eye on the time, and I understand that you do have a book project in the works. I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about that?
I have a contract with the same publisher they called us Enemy. And part of the contract says that my publishers get the first right to talk about that when they make that announcement, put out that press release. But
Okay.
I can't tell you it's by the same IDW publishers, and it's going to be a graphic memoir as well.
Hmm.
My life, another aspect of my life, and I can tell you that much more. And I have to end it there because I have a red line, which I must not go across. They get to announce that in detail with the press release, which
I'm
should be
sure.
coming out soon.
I'm sure we won't tell anybody. Nobody will tell, right? Everyone's agreed. Well,
I
I
was
want to
born
thank.
yesterday.
We're very trusting here. Um, I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us this evening. Thanks to the Friends of the Alameda Free Libraries for organizing this event. I want to remind everyone also that the Friends do so much to advocate for the wonderful work of the City of Alameda's libraries. So please consider supporting them with a donation. You can go to alamedafriends.org to find out how to give. There's also information in the chat. And of course, our deepest gratitude, my deepest gratitude to George Takei for spending time with us tonight. Once again, the graphic novel is They Called Us Enemy. You can find it in bookstores and libraries everywhere. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen and George, and thanks to our viewers for joining us for this amazing discussion. We really enjoyed George's sharing of his personal experiences on the disgraceful American history of the relocation of Japanese Americans, his life as a Japanese American, and the story as recorded in the book, They Call Us Enemy. And a reminder that George's book is available at Books Inc. in Alameda and at the Alameda Free Library. I also want to thank our super moderator, Mary Ellen Hunt, who also has many friends among our viewers. This was an exceptional program, and we're so fortunate for their joining us tonight. And we have terrific upcoming Friends at Home programs. On June 14th, art docent Avril Angevine will discuss the remarkable Depression-era photography of Dorothea Lange, followed on July 14th, From Sea to Shining Sea, covering paintings of the 19th century American artists who depict the country spirit as defined by the landscape. We wrap up the month on July 20th with author and San Franciscan Aaliyah Volz, who will talk about her new award-winning memoir, Home Baked, My Mom, Marijuana, and the Stoning of San Francisco. So please join us. Watch our website, newsletter, and Facebook page for additional events and to register. Finally, a special thanks to our production team, David Beal, Karen Romer, and Karen Manuel. Finally, thanks to you, our audience, for joining us tonight. Good night.